Hey there. Tonight we're going back not to castles and kings, but to the edges of history, the part that doesn't make it into paintings or heroic films. We're talking about the American cowboy. Not the stoic hero with a clean hat and a quick draw, but the exhausted, underpaid and overworked laborer who drove cattle across a landscape that was actively trying to kill him. We're peeling back the myth to find the grit, the grime, and the quiet misery of a life that was far more brutal than it was romantic. If this kind of calm, slow history helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it actually brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always strangely comforting to see who's out there falling asleep to the same quiet story. So, dim the lights, turn on a fan if you like that soft background hum. Settle in, and let's begin at the edge of the map, somewhere on the dusty plains of the 19th century. Chapter 1. Waking to the smell of reality. Congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1875. You're a cowboy. The good news is, you're part of a legend. The bad news? The legend is a lie, and every part of your body already aches. The first thing you notice isn't the sunrise, it's the smell. It hits you before your eyes even crack open, a dense, layered assault on your senses that tells you exactly where you are. It's the smell of a bunkhouse. It's the aroma of 20 unwashed men, stale sweat and damp wool that has never known soap. It's the lingering scent of cheap tobacco, spilled whiskey, and the faint, sour tang of manure clinging to a dozen pairs of worn-out boots. Underneath it all is the musty odor of the straw-stuffed mattresses, which are less bedding and more thriving ecosystems for fleas, lice, and other things you try not to think about in the dark. This isn't the crisp, clean air of the open prairie you've seen in the movies. This is the smell of poverty, exhaustion, and poor ventilation. You're lying on a rough wooden bunk, a splintered plank that groans under your weight. Your mattress, a canvas sack filled with lumpy straw, has developed its own unique topography over the months. Valleys where others have slept, and hard, compressed peaks that dig into your spine. There are no pillows, just your own rolled-up jacket or perhaps a saddle blanket that carries the scent of horse and dust. The blanket on top of you is a coarse slab of wool, stiff with grime and heavy enough to feel like a second job. It provides warmth, but also a constant, low-grade itch that you've learned to ignore, mostly. The air is cold. So cold it feels sharp in your lungs. The bunkhouse is little more than a drafty wooden box, built for function, not comfort. Gaps in the walls let the pre-dawn chill seep in, a damp, biting cold that settles deep in your bones. There's a potbelly stove in the corner, but it went cold hours ago. No one wastes fuel overnight. Waking up here isn't a gentle process. It's a sudden, shivering return to a world that offers no softness. You can hear the others stirring. The sound of coughing is the bunkhouse orchestra's opening number, a dry, hacking cough from one corner, a deep, rattling one from another. It's the soundtrack of men who spend their days inhaling dust and their nights breathing cold, smoky air. Then comes the groaning, the collective sound of sore muscles, aching joints, and the profound weariness of men whose bodies are their only tools. You're maybe 22 years old, but you feel 40. Your back cracks as you sit up, and your knees sound like gravel rolling in a tin can. This isn't the ache of a good workout. It's the permanent, grinding pain of manual labor performed from sunup to sundown, day after day, week after week. There's no privacy here. The bunks are crammed together, sometimes stacked 3 high. You know the sleeping habits of every man in this room. You know who snores, who mutters in his sleep, who kicks. You live in each other's space, breathing the same air, sharing the same small pool of warmth. It's a forced intimacy, born of necessity, not friendship. You might know the name of the man sleeping a foot away from you, but you probably don't know his story. Cowboys learn not to ask too many questions. A past was a private thing, and most men came west to escape one. Before your feet even touch the floor, you do something out of habit. You grab your boots and shake them out. Vigorously. Not for dust, but for scorpions, spiders, or even the occasional rattlesnake seeking warmth in the night. More than one cowboy learned that lesson the hard way, a searing pain shooting up his leg before he'd even had his morning coffee. A venomous bite out here wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a potential death sentence, miles from any so-called doctor. You pull on your boots over socks that are stiff with dried sweat. They are your most important possession, the one piece of gear that can mean the difference between working and being crippled. But they are not comfortable. The leather is hard and unforgiving, and by the end of the day, your feet will be a raw collection of blisters and sores, but you don't complain. No one does. This is just the start of the day, and the bunkhouse, for all its misery, is the easiest part. The real work is waiting for you outside, under a vast and indifferent sky. And it's a sky that has no pity for aching bones or weary souls. Welcome to your life. Chapter 2. A Cowboy's Closet and Morning Rituals. Now that you've survived the sensory experience of the bunkhouse, it's time to get dressed and face the day. Forget the romantic image of the cowboy meticulously choosing his outfit, the perfectly creased hat, the stylish leather vest. Your wardrobe is not a statement. It's a uniform of pure function, and it consists of exactly one set of clothes. The one you are currently wearing, the one you slept in, the one you will wear for the next several months. Let's start from the inside out. Underwear, if you have any, is a pair of long johns made of rough, unforgiving wool. In the summer, they are an instrument of torture, trapping sweat and chafing your skin raw. In the winter, they are your only defense against a cold that feels like it's trying to chew its way through your flesh. You wear them until they literally disintegrate off your body. Washing them is a rare event, a special occasion that might happen once a season if you're near a river and have a spare hour, which you don't. Over this you wear a shirt, likely made of coarse cotton or flannel. It's stained with sweat, dirt, coffee, and probably a little blood from a branding accident last month. The collar is frayed, the buttons are a collection of mismatched replacements, and the fabric has the texture of a burlap sack. It does nothing to protect you from the sun in the summer or the cold in the winter, but it's what you have. Your pants are made of denim or canvas, tough materials designed to withstand the constant friction of the saddle. They are stiff, abrasive, and patched in multiple places. They are never, ever clean. They carry a geological record of your work layers of dust from the trail, mud from a river crossing, and the dark, greasy stains of cattle and campfire. There are no zippers. A simple button fly is all that keeps them together, and they are held up not by a stylish, silver-buckled belt, but by simple suspenders, because a belt would dig into your waist painfully after 12 hours in the saddle. Then come the chaps, the leather leggings worn over your pants. These are not a fashion accessory. They are a vital piece of armor. They protect your legs from thorny brush, cactus spines, rope burns, and the occasional kick from an uncooperative steer. They are heavy, cumbersome, and in the summer heat, feel like you've wrapped your legs in a furnace. But without them, your pants and the legs inside them would be shredded in a matter of days. Your vest, if you have one, is also for function. Its pockets are where you keep your essentials. A small pouch of tobacco, rolling papers, maybe a pocket knife. It adds a negligible layer of warmth, but its main purpose is storage. It is, like everything else stained and worn, a testament to a life lived without closets or dressers. On your head sits your most iconic and important piece of gear, your hat. It's not the clean, perfectly shaped Stetson of the movies. It's a felt hat, stained with sweat, battered by wind and rain, and molded by your own hands into a shape that suits your needs. It is your umbrella in the rain, your sunshade in the desert heat, your bucket for watering your horse, your pillow at night, and your signal to other riders in the distance. A man's hat was his signature, but it was also his most practical tool. Losing your hat in a storm or a stampede wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a serious, life-threatening problem. Finally, around your neck you tie a bandana or a silk scarf. This isn't for looks, it's a filter. When you're riding at the back of a herd, a position known as drag, you're enveloped in a choking cloud of dust kicked up by thousands of hooves. You pull the bandana up over your nose and mouth to keep from breathing it in, though it only helps so much. By the end of the day, your teeth will be gritty with dust, and your throat will feel like sandpaper. It also serves as a washcloth, a bandage, a pot holder, or a tourniquet. It is the most versatile square of cloth you will ever own. And what about hygiene? The morning routine is brutally simple. You don't shower, you don't shave, you don't brush your teeth. If you're near a trough or a creek, you might splash some icy water on your face to wake yourself up. You might run your fingers through your hair to get the worst of the bunkhouse debris out. That's it. Shaving was a luxury reserved for town. On the trail, a beard was a practical defense against sun and wind. Soap was a rare commodity. And your teeth? Oral hygiene was non-existent. You might chew on a twig to scrape away some of the grime, but for the most part, your teeth were left to fend for themselves. By age 30, most cowboys had a collection of rotting teeth, swollen gums, and a breath that could knock a buzzard off a fence post. A toothache on the trail was a special kind of hell. There were no dentists. The cure was usually a pair of pliers, a strong shot of whiskey for the patient and the doctor, and a whole lot of screaming. Pulling the wrong tooth, or breaking it off, could lead to a fatal infection. So you stand there, fully dressed in your stiff, smelly armor, your body aching, your mouth tasting like yesterday's misery. You are not a hero preparing for an adventure. You are a laborer preparing for another day of grinding, repetitive and dangerous work. The romance of the cowboy is a fiction. The reality is this: you are uncomfortable, you are unclean, and you have a long day of suffering ahead of you. And the sun isn't even fully up yet. Chapter 3. Breakfast of Champions of Suffering. Your stomach growls, a hollow, empty ache that demands attention. It's time for breakfast, the meal that will fuel you for the next 10 hours of hard labor. You might be picturing a hearty campfire scene, sizzling bacon, fluffy scrambled eggs, and golden brown pancakes. Erase that image from your mind. That's a Hollywood fantasy. The reality of a cowboy's breakfast is a monotonous, nutritionally barren, and often disgusting affair. You shuffle out of the bunkhouse and head towards the fire, where the camp cook, or cookie, is already at work. The cook is one of the most important figures on a cattle drive. He's often an older, retired cowboy, too broken down for the saddle but still tough as leather. He's the undisputed king of the chuck wagon, and his mood can set the tone for the entire day. You do not cross the cook. You do not complain about his food. You eat what you're given, and you say thank you, because he's the only thing standing between you and starvation. The centerpiece of your breakfast, and indeed almost every meal, is beans. Not the sweet, saucy baked beans you might be thinking of. These are pinto beans, boiled with salt pork, until they form a thick brown sludge. They are hearty, they are cheap, and they are ever present. You will eat beans for breakfast, beans for dinner, and if there are leftovers, beans for breakfast again tomorrow. They are the fuel of the West, the source of your energy, and, consequently, the source of a great deal of digestive distress around the campfire at night. Alongside the beans you get a biscuit. Not a light, flaky, buttery creation. This is a chuck wagon biscuit, a dense, heavy puck of flour, water, salt and lard, baked in a cast-iron Dutch oven buried in the coals of the fire. It's hard enough to stop a bullet, and often just as tasteless. It's a vehicle for soaking up bean juice or coffee, a lump of carbohydrates meant to fill the empty space in your stomach. Sometimes, the cook might make sourdough, a slightly more flavorful but equally dense bread. Either way, it's a jaw-breaking exercise in chewing. And what about meat? If you're lucky, there might be some salt pork fried up. This isn't crispy bacon. It's intensely salty, chewy pork fat, preserved to last for months without refrigeration. It's more salt than meat, a flavor explosion that will leave you desperately thirsty for the rest of the day. Sometimes it was called sobelly. You'd get a small piece, just enough to add some flavor and fat to your beans. The most important part of the meal, however, is the coffee. The coffee is the lifeblood of the cowboy. It's what gets you moving in the freezing pre-dawn dark. But this is not the artisanal, ethically sourced brew you know today. This is cowboy coffee, and it is an abomination. The cook starts with green coffee beans, which he roasts over the fire until they are dark and oily. Then he crushes them, often using the butt of a pistol or a rock. He dumps the grounds into a massive pot of boiling water and lets it simmer for what seems like an eternity. There are no filters. The result is a thick, black, tar-like liquid, so bitter it makes your teeth ache. It's gritty with grounds, and you learn to sip carefully to avoid a mouthful of sludge. Cowboys had various tricks to try and settle the grounds, like tossing in a crushed eggshell or even a clean sock, but it rarely worked. You drank it anyway. You drank it scalding hot, black, and strong enough to dissolve a horseshoe. The caffeine was a drug, a jolt to your exhausted system, and the warmth was a brief respite from the morning cold. You receive your meal on a tin plate, which you'll rinse with sand and wipe with your bandana when you're done. You find a spot on the ground, away from the dust kicked up by the horses, and you eat. Quickly. There's no time for conversation or savouring the flavours, mostly because there are no flavours to savour. You shovel the food into your mouth, your eyes on the horizon, already thinking about the day's work. It's a purely functional act. This meal isn't meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to provide enough calories to keep you in the saddle. Fresh fruit? Vegetables? Forget it. Unless the cook managed to trade for some potatoes or onions at a rare frontier outpost, your diet is devoid of vitamins. Scurvy was a real and constant threat. A disease of vitamin C deficiency. It caused your gums to bleed, your teeth to loosen and fall out, and old wounds to reopen. It was a slow, painful way to go, and it was all too common among men living on a diet of beans, biscuits, and salt pork. You finish your meal, scrape your plate clean, and gulp down the last of the tar black coffee. You feel full but not nourished. Your body has been given fuel, but not what it needs to thrive. It's a temporary fix, enough to get you through the morning. Dinner will be more of the same, and so will the dinner after that. This is the culinary landscape of your life, a relentless horizon of brown, salty, and bland. You don't eat for pleasure, you eat to survive. And with that grim thought, you stand up, your joints protesting, and walk towards the remuda to catch your horse. The workday has begun. Chapter 4. Man's best friend is a 10-pound problem. In the mythology of the West, the cowboy and his horse are an inseparable pair, a partnership of mutual trust and affection. The cowboy whispers to his loyal steed, and the horse responds with unwavering devotion. This is, for the most part, a complete fabrication. For you, the 19th century cowboy, a horse is not a friend, it is a tool. A complicated, unpredictable, and often dangerous tool that you are paid to use. Your day doesn't begin with a single trusted mount. A cowboy on a cattle drive was assigned a string of horses, typically between 5 and 10 animals from the camp's herd, known as the remuda. You would ride a different horse every few hours. This wasn't for variety. It was a practical necessity. The work was so grueling that a single horse would be exhausted and lame within a day if ridden continuously. You had your morning horse, your afternoon horse, your night horse for guard duty, and maybe a particularly fast one for cutting cattle out of the herd. These were not the sleek, well-trained quarter horses of modern rodeos. These were mustangs or other hardy range horses, often only semi-broken. They were wild animals that had been forced into service, and they never let you forget it. Many of them had a mean streak a mile wide. They would buck, bite, kick, or try to scrape you off on a low-hanging branch just for the sheer hell of it. Every time you mounted a new horse, you were rolling the dice. Will this one try to kill me? It was a very real question. The process of breaking a horse was not a gentle dialogue between man and beast. It was a brutal contest of wills. A horse would be roped, choked into submission, blindfolded, and then saddled. The cowboy, the bronco buster, would then climb aboard and hang on for dear life as the terrified animal exploded into a frenzy of bucking, spinning, and leaping. The goal was not to train the horse, but to exhaust it, to ride it until it was too tired to fight anymore. It was a process that could injure or kill both the horse and the rider. Many cowboys got their start as bronco busters, a job that paid slightly more but had a life expectancy you could measure with a calendar. Even a broken horse was never truly tame. You approached every horse with caution. You learned to read its body language, the flick of an ear, the tensing of a muscle, the white of its eye. A moment's inattention could result in a broken leg, a crushed foot, or a kick to the head, and out on the prairie a serious injury was a death sentence. Then there was the gear. Your saddle was the most expensive thing you owned, often costing more than the horse itself. It was your office chair, your workbench, and your most vital piece of equipment. But it wasn't designed for comfort. It was a heavy, rigid frame of wood and leather designed to distribute weight on the horse's back and withstand the strain of roping a half-ton steer. After 12 to 14 hours in that saddle, every part of your body would be screaming in protest. The friction of your clothes against the leather would chafe your skin raw, creating painful sores known as saddle galls. The constant jarring motion would send shockwaves up your spine, leading to chronic back pain that would plague you for the rest of your short life. The bridle and bit were instruments of control, pure and simple. The bits were often harsh, designed to give you maximum leverage over a stubborn animal's head. A quick jerk on the reins was all that stood between you and a stampede, but that same jerk could injure the horse's mouth. It was a constant, delicate balance of force and finesse. The simple act of saddling your horse in the dark, cold morning was fraught with risk. The horse, still half wild and irritable, might kick or bite. The heavy saddle might slip. The cinch, the strap that holds the saddle on, had to be tightened just right. Too loose, and the saddle could roll, throwing you to the ground. Too tight, and the horse might panic and start bucking. Many a cowboy was injured before the day's work even began, just trying to get his equipment in order. And the horse was your responsibility. If your assigned horse got injured, stepped in a prairie dog hole and broke its leg, got gored by a steer, or became sick, it was a serious problem. A lame horse was useless. Out on the trail, there were no veterinarians. The only cure for a broken leg was a bullet. You would be the one to administer it, a grim task that no one enjoyed. You would then have to walk back to the remuda, a humbling and exhausting experience, to get a new mount. Your relationship with your horse was one of wary respect, not love. You respected its power, its stamina, and its ability to get you through a dangerous situation. It respected your ability to control it, to find it water and grass, and to remove the saddle at the end of a long day. You depended on each other for survival, but you were not partners in the modern sense. You were a laborer, and the horse was your living, breathing, and frequently unwilling machinery. The romantic notion of a cowboy riding off into the sunset on his trusted steed is a powerful image. But the reality was far less poetic. It was the image of an exhausted man on an equally exhausted animal, both just trying to make it to the next sunrise without getting killed. Chapter 5. The Endless, Dusty Road. The work of a cowboy was not a series of exciting gunfights and daring rescues. It was, for the most part, crushingly boring. It was a job defined by long periods of monotonous labor, punctuated by brief moments of sheer terror. The primary task, and the reason for your existence, was the cattle drive. Moving thousands of head of cattle, hundreds, sometimes thousands, of miles from the open ranges of Texas to the railroad towns in Kansas or Nebraska. Imagine your workplace. It's not an office. It's a vast, featureless expanse of prairie under a relentless sky. There are no landmarks, no roads, no signs. Just an endless sea of grass, dust, and cattle. Your job is to ride in this environment for up to 18 hours a day, for 3 to 4 months at a time. The herd moves slowly, maybe 10 to 15 miles on a good day. It's a walking city of livestock, a river of horns and hides that stretches for miles. Your position in this moving city determines the quality of your day. The most experienced cowboys ride at the point, guiding the lead steers. The younger, less experienced riders take the flanks, keeping the herd from spreading out too wide. And the newest, unluckiest cowboys, you get the drag. Riding drag is the worst job on the trail. You are at the very back of the herd, enveloped in a permanent, choking cloud of dust kicked up by 0 cattle. The dust is so thick you can't see more than a few feet in front of you. It coats your skin, your clothes, your food. It gets in your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your lungs. You learn to tie your bandana over your face, but it's a futile gesture. By the end of the day, you will have inhaled what feels like half the prairie. Your teeth will be caked with a gritty paste, and your cough will bring up brown phlegm. You spend your day chivying along the weakest, slowest, and sickest animals, the stubborn calves, the lame steers, the ones who would rather lie down and die than take another step. It is a miserable, thankless, and unending task. The monotony is soul-crushing. For hours on end, you do nothing but ride, watch cattle, and listen to the constant lowing sound of the herd and the plodding of hooves. The sun beats down on you without mercy. The heat is oppressive, and there is no shade. You can feel your skin burning, your lips cracking. Thirst is your constant companion. Water is strictly rationed. You might get a few sips from your canteen every hour, just enough to keep you from passing out. The water itself is often warm, stagnant, and tastes of tin. You dream of cold, clear water, of a river, of a well. But all you have is the vast, dry emptiness. The days blend into one another, a seamless tapestry of dust, heat, and boredom. You lose track of time, of the date, of the world beyond the herd. Your universe shrinks to the back of the steer in front of you. You talk to your horse. You sing to yourself. You fall into a half-conscious state, your body moving automatically in the saddle while your mind drifts. This is the reality of the cattle drive. Not high adventure, but a slow, grinding erosion of the spirit. But this boredom is a fragile thing, easily shattered by sudden, violent action. The greatest fear on a cattle drive is the stampede. 1,000 head of longhorn cattle, each weighing half a ton, are nervous, skittish creatures. A clap of thunder, a lightning strike, the sudden appearance of a predator, or even just a cowboy sneezing at the wrong moment can trigger a panic. When a stampede hits, the world explodes. The lowing of the herd turns into a deafening roar. The ground trembles as thousands of hooves pound the earth. The cattle become a single, unstoppable force, a brown river of terror flowing blindly across the plains, and your job is to ride straight into it. You spur your horse, your heart hammering against your ribs. You ride alongside the charging herd, trying to turn the lead steers, to get them to circle back on themselves, until the panic subsides and the herd runs itself out. It is the most dangerous work imaginable. Your horse could stumble in a hole, throwing you directly into the path of the trampling hooves. In the dark, you could ride off a cliff or into a ravine. Many cowboys died this way, their bodies discovered days later, broken and trampled beyond recognition. You ride for hours, shouting, firing your pistol into the air, doing anything to get the herd to turn. It is a contest of raw courage and pure adrenaline. And if you survive, you spend the next 2 days gathering the scattered cattle, exhausted, bruised, and knowing that it could happen again at any moment. River crossings are another form of scheduled terror. There are no bridges. To cross a river, you have to force a herd of reluctant cattle into the water. The cattle are afraid of the water. They might refuse to go in, or they might turn back halfway across, creating a deadly pileup. Or the current could be too strong, sweeping animals and riders downstream. The riverbeds are often soft mud or quicksand, where wagons and horses can become hopelessly stuck. Cowboys drowned, crushed between panicking steers, or pulled under by the weight of their own waterlogged gear. This is your life for months on end, mind-numbing boredom punctuated by moments of life-threatening terror. You are not a hero. You are a disposable laborer, paid $1 a day to risk your life moving someone else's property. The landscape is not your friend. It is a beautiful, deadly antagonist. And as you ride, covered in dust, your throat raw, your body aching, you look out at the endless horizon and wonder if this trail will ever end. Chapter 6. The Wounds You Don't See Coming. Life on the frontier was a constant war against your own body. For a cowboy, the most immediate threats might seem to be a bucking horse or a stampeding herd, but the slower, quieter dangers of disease and injury were far more likely to kill you. In a world without modern medicine, without a basic understanding of germ theory, and without access to any real medical care, the simplest mishap could spiral into a fatal catastrophe. Let's start with the everyday injuries. Roping a steer could sever a finger if your hand got caught in the lariat. A fall from a horse, a common occurrence, could mean a broken arm, a broken leg, or a fractured skull. Getting kicked by a horse or gored by a steer could result in massive internal injuries. These weren't minor incidents. Out on the trail, hundreds of miles from the nearest town, a broken leg was a death sentence. There were no doctors on a cattle drive. The camp cook often doubled as the medic, armed with a bottle of whiskey, a few folk remedies, and a great deal of misplaced confidence. The whiskey served as both an antiseptic and an anesthetic, though it was largely ineffective as either. A wound would be doused in whiskey, a process that was excruciatingly painful, and then wrapped in a dirty rag. Infection was not a risk. It was a certainty. Imagine getting a deep gash in your arm. The cook cleans it with whiskey and stitches it up with a regular needle and thread from his sewing kit, neither of which has been sterilized. Within days, the wound is red, swollen, and oozing pus. You develop a fever. You become delirious. The infection spreads through your bloodstream, a condition known as sepsis. There are no antibiotics to fight it. You can only lie in the back of the chuck wagon, sweating and shivering, while your body tries to fight a battle it is almost certain to lose. This is how many cowboys died not from the initial injury, but from the infection that followed. If you broke a bone, the treatment was even cruder. The bone would be roughly set, without x-rays to guide the process, and then splintered with pieces of wood from a crate. If the bone was setting correctly, it would heal crooked, leaving you with a permanent disability and chronic pain. If the fracture broke the skin, a compound fracture, infection was almost guaranteed to set in, leading to gangrene. Gangrene is when the tissue begins to die and rot. The only treatment was amputation. Amputation on the trail was a butcher's work. The patient would be given as much whiskey as he could drink, held down by several men, and the cook would saw off the limb with a standard handsaw, the kind used for cutting wood. The stump would then be cauterized with a hot iron from the fire to stop the bleeding. The shock and pain of the procedure alone could kill a man. If you survived the surgery, you still had to survive the inevitable infection. Beyond these dramatic injuries, there were the slower, more insidious health problems. The cowboy's diet of beans, biscuits, and salted meat was a recipe for nutritional deficiencies. As mentioned, scurvy was rampant. But there were other issues. A lack of calcium led to weak bones. A lack of fiber led to chronic and painful constipation. The constant exposure to the elements sun, wind, dust, rain, and cold took its toll. Your skin would become weathered and leathery, prone to sun cancers. Your eyes, constantly assaulted by dust and glare, would suffer. Many older cowboys had poor vision. Your lungs, filled with dust day after day, were susceptible to what was called consumption or tuberculosis. Then there were the waterborne illnesses. The water you drank on the trail came from rivers, streams, and ponds that were often contaminated by the waste of the thousands of cattle you were driving. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery were common. These diseases caused severe diarrhea and vomiting, leading to rapid dehydration. In a hot, arid environment where water was already scarce, these illnesses could kill in a matter of days. You would simply waste away, your body unable to retain any fluids, until your organs failed. Even the insects were a threat. Mosquitoes carried malaria in some regions. Ticks carried Rocky Mountain spotted fever. A simple insect bite could lead to a raging fever and death. And if you did manage to make it to a town, the medical care wasn't much better. Frontier doctors were often quacks with no formal training. Their offices were unsanitary, their tools were dirty, and their treatments were based on outdated and dangerous theories. They might prescribe mercury or arsenic, toxic heavy metals that did more harm than good. Bloodletting was still a common practice. Surgery was a gamble with terrible odds. You lived with the constant awareness that your body was fragile and that help was not coming. A toothache could become an abscess that poisoned your blood. A simple cut could lead to gangrene and amputation. A cough could be the start of a fatal lung disease. Cowboys developed a stoic, fatalistic attitude toward pain and illness. You didn't complain, because there was nothing anyone could do. You worked through the pain until you literally couldn't stand anymore. And when you collapsed, you were left behind. The herd had to keep moving. The business of the cattle drive could not stop for one sick or injured man. You might be left at the nearest frontier settlement, if there was one, or simply left under a tree with a canteen of water and a blanket. Your survival was in the hands of fate. In the Wild West, only the lucky and the incredibly resilient survived. Chapter 7. The Wild West Saloon. A deeper look. You finally made it. After months on the trail, eating dust and dreaming of civilization, you ride into a dusty, chaotic cattle town like Dodge City or Abilene. Your pockets are heavy with a few months' wages, and your soul is thirsty for something other than stagnant river water. The first place you head is the saloon. In the movies, the saloon is a place of romance and adventure. A handsome hero walks through the swinging doors, a piano player provides a lively tune, and elegantly dressed women look on. The reality was a far cry from this sanitized image. For you, the cowboy, the saloon was the chaotic, violent, and often disgusting epicenter of frontier town life. Let's start with the building itself. Most saloons were not grand establishments. They were simple, hastily constructed wooden buildings with a false front to make them look more impressive. Inside, the floor was bare wood, covered in a mixture of dirt, sawdust, and spit. The sawdust wasn't for decoration. It was there to soak up the spilled liquor, tobacco juice, and occasional blood. The air was thick with the smoke of cheap cigars and the smell of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and despair. The bar was a long plank of rough-hewn wood set on top of barrels. Behind it stood the bartender, who was often the most dangerous man in the room. He was part psychologist, part bouncer, and part chemist, and he was an expert at separating you from your money. What were you drinking? Forget the smooth, aged whiskey of the movies. The liquor served in a frontier saloon was known as Tanglefoot, 40 Rod, or Tarantula Juice, and for good reason. It was often raw, unaged alcohol, distilled quickly and cheaply. To give it color and a semblance of flavor, bartenders would mix in additives. Tobacco juice, molasses, and burnt sugar were common. To give it an extra kick and make it seem stronger, they might add red pepper, turpentine, or even gunpowder. A single glass of this concoction could cause temporary blindness, violent illness, or a hangover of such epic proportions that you would wish for death. It was poison, sold by the glass. The saloon was a place of release, a place to wash away the months of dust and loneliness. But it was also a place of incredible danger. It was a room full of young, testosterone-fueled men, most of them armed, who had been deprived of social contact for months. Add cheap, powerful alcohol to this mix, and the result was predictable: violence. The gunfights you see in movies, the formal high-noon duels in the middle of the street, were almost entirely a myth. Real frontier violence was messy, impulsive, and usually happened inside a saloon. An argument over a card game, a drunken insult, a dispute over a woman, these were the things that led to bloodshed. A man wouldn't call you out into the street. He would pull his pistol and start shooting right there at the bar. It was chaos. Bullets flew, glass shattered, and men dived for cover. Most of the people shot in these altercations weren't even involved in the initial dispute. They were just unlucky bystanders. And everyone was armed. But not in the way you might think. Many frontier towns, contrary to the myth of the lawless West, had strict gun control ordinances. Upon entering town, you were often required to check your firearms with the local sheriff or at a designated office. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone started because the Clanton gang refused to disarm. The purpose of these laws was to reduce the very kind of drunken, impulsive violence that plagued saloons. Of course, the laws were difficult to enforce, and many men kept smaller, hidden weapons on them. The saloon was also a hub of gambling. Faro, poker, and Monte were the games of choice. But these were not friendly games among equals. They were often run by professional gamblers, or sharps, who were masters of cheating. Marked cards, hidden devices, and sleight of hand were the tools of their trade. They were there to fleece you, the naive cowboy fresh off the trail with a pocket full of cash. You might sit down at a table hoping to double your meager wages, but the far more likely outcome was that you would walk away with nothing. Arguments over cheating were another common spark for violence. And then there were the soiled doves, the prostitutes who worked in the saloons and brothels. The myth portrays them as glamorous women with hearts of gold. The reality was grim. Most were young women who had been trapped in the profession by poverty, abandonment, or abuse. Their lives were hard and often short. They faced the constant threat of violence from drunken clients, and they were ravaged by venereal diseases like syphilis and gonorrhea, for which there was no cure. An encounter with a prostitute could leave a cowboy with a disease that would cause insanity, paralysis, and a slow, agonizing death years later. For you, the cowboy, a trip to town and a night at the saloon was a ritual of self-destruction. You would arrive with 3 months' pay, perhaps $90. In a matter of days, sometimes hours, it would be gone. Spent on poisonous liquor, rigged card games, and a brief, sad encounter in an upstairs room. You would wake up in an alley, your head pounding, your body bruised, and your pockets empty. And then you would have to sign on for another cattle drive, another several months of grueling labor, just to do it all over again. The saloon was not a place of freedom and adventure. It was a key part of an economic machine that was designed to keep you poor, desperate, and dependent. It was a place that sold you a fleeting illusion of happiness, and in return, took everything you had. Chapter 8. The Cowboy's Final Sunset. What happened to a cowboy when he got old? The myth gives us the image of the wise old rancher sitting on his porch, watching the sunset over the land he tamed. Or perhaps the grizzled, retired gunfighter, his violent past behind him, living out his days in peace. As with everything else, the reality was far less romantic. For the vast majority of cowboys, there was no retirement, there was no pension, there was no quiet cottage. There was only a slow decline into poverty, disability, and obscurity. The life of a cowboy was a young man's game. The work was so physically demanding that most men were considered old by the time they were 30. By 40, a man's body was typically too broken down to continue the grueling work of the cattle drive. Years of sleeping on hard ground, eating poor food, and enduring the constant jarring of the saddle had taken their toll. Chronic back pain, arthritis, and old, poorly healed injuries made riding for 18 hours a day impossible. So what did you do when you could no longer ride? You had very few options. You had no savings. The $1-a-day wage you earned was barely enough to survive on, and what little you had was usually spent at the end of the trail, in a whirlwind of drinking and gambling. You had no property. You were a transient laborer who owned nothing but his saddle and the clothes on his back. You had no other skills. Your entire life had been spent working with cattle and horses. You were illiterate, or close to it, and had no experience that would translate to another profession. Some former cowboys were lucky enough to find work that was less physically demanding but still connected to their old life. You might become a camp cook, the cookie, if you knew your way around a Dutch oven. This was considered a respectable position, a way to stay on the trail without having to be in the saddle. You might find work as a bartender in a saloon, or as a stable hand, or a blacksmith's helper. These jobs didn't pay well, but they provided a roof over your head. A very few, managed to save enough money to buy their own small ranch or farm. But this was exceptionally rare. It required not just money, but a great deal of luck and business sense. Most cowboys were ill-equipped to manage their own enterprise. They were used to taking orders, not giving them. For the vast majority, the future was grim. You became a drifter, wandering from town to town, looking for odd jobs. You might work as a seasonal farmhand, a dishwasher, a swamper cleaning out saloons. You lived in flop houses, cheap boarding houses that offered a lice-infested bed for a few cents a night. Your health, already poor from years of hardship, would continue to decline. Without proper nutrition or medical care, you were susceptible to disease. A simple cold could turn into pneumonia, which was often fatal. Many old cowboys ended up as town drunks, spending their days begging for coins to buy a bottle of cheap whiskey to numb the pain of their existence. They were figures of pity or contempt, a far cry from the heroic horsemen they had once been. They would die in an alley, or a flop house, or a charity hospital, and be buried in an unmarked grave in the potter's field. There was no social safety net, no social security, no disability insurance, no welfare. If you couldn't work, you starved, unless you could rely on the charity of others. Churches and benevolent societies did what they could, but their resources were limited. The open-range cattle drives that defined the cowboy era were themselves a short-lived phenomenon. They began in earnest after the Civil War and were largely over by the late 1880s. The invention of barbed wire was the death knell. Homesteaders and ranchers began fencing off the plains, closing the long, open trails. The expansion of the railroads meant that cattle no longer needed to be driven hundreds of miles to market. The era of the Great Cattle Drive, and the need for large numbers of itinerant cowboys, lasted only about 20 years. So what happened to the thousands of men who had made their living this way? They were made redundant. The skills they had honed, the hardships they had endured, were no longer in demand. They were relics of a bygone era, left to fend for themselves in a rapidly changing world. The tragic irony of the cowboy is that he became a national folk hero only after he had effectively vanished. As the real cowboy was dying in poverty and obscurity, the mythological cowboy was being born in dime novels, Wild West shows, and later, movies. The nation became fascinated with a romanticized image of a free-spirited, independent hero at the very moment the reality of that life, a life of low-wage, high-risk, transient labor had disappeared. So when you picture the cowboy, don't picture the hero riding off into the sunset. Picture the 40-year-old man with a body that feels like it's 80, his back in constant pain, his teeth gone, his lungs filled with dust. Picture him sweeping the floor of a saloon for a few cents, remembering a time when he rode under a vast open sky. A time that was brutal and unforgiving, but a time when he was at least part of something. His sunset is not a golden blaze of glory. It is a slow, cold fade into a forgotten darkness. Chapter 9. The dust settles on the myth. So, how's your day been? You've woken up in filth, eaten a meal that would make a rock taste gourmet, risked your life on the back of a half-wild animal, and stared into the soul-crushing void of the endless prairie. You've faced the prospect of a violent death in a saloon, a slow death from infection, and an even slower death from poverty and neglect. Welcome to a single day in the life of an American cowboy. Still dreaming of the open range? That romanticized version of the Wild West, the noble gunslinger, the freedom of the trail, the simple code of honoris, a powerful and enduring myth. But it is a myth, polished by a century of stories that chose to ignore the grime for the glory. The truth is, the cowboy was not a knight-errant of the plains. He was a member of the rural working poor. He was an industrial laborer in an agricultural setting, a cog in the massive machine that was the 19th century beef industry. His life was not one of freedom, but of grueling, repetitive work, low wages, and constant danger. He was often illiterate, usually unhealthy, and almost always disposable. The simpler times were not simple. They were relentless. Everything was harder, took longer, and was more dangerous. There was no safety net, no medical care to speak of, no guarantee that you would live to see the next season. The cowboy's life was one of profound hardship, punctuated by fleeting moments of camaraderie and the stark, desolate beauty of the land he crossed. And if you did manage to find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better, there wasn't much you could do with it. There was no upward mobility. You didn't work your way up from cowboy to cattle baron. You worked until your body gave out, and then you were replaced. You lived, suffered, worked, and died, and the world barely noticed. But here's the wildest part. Through all of this, these men endured. They developed a unique culture, a code of stoicism, and a dark sense of humor. They found meaning not in heroism, but in competence, not in wealth, but in survival. They faced down death, boredom, and despair on a daily basis, not because they were heroes, but because it was their job. So tonight, when you see a classic Western film, or read a novel about a lone rider, maybe say a quiet thank you to the modern world, a world with antibiotics, labor laws, and food that doesn't consist solely of beans. And remember the real cowboy, the one who wasn't a legend but a laborer, the one who fought dust, thirst, and loneliness, all for $1 a day. The one whose real story, stripped of the romance, is a testament not to heroism, but to the quiet, stubborn endurance of the human spirit in the face of a world that was anything but heroic.